Picture this, the year is 1492. A cold wind crawls through the stone corridors of a fortress you've never seen before. Moments ago, you were in your home, tending the fire, mending a dress, or simply speaking a thought that the wrong man overheard. Now your wrists are bound, your feet drag across the dirt floor, and two armored guards pull you toward a room lit only by the glow of open flames. You don't know your crime. Maybe you spoke too boldly. Maybe someone whispered your name in anger. Maybe you were chosen simply because fear needs a target. What you do know is this: the men around you aren't taking you to plead your case or hear your defense. They're leading you to a device built with a single purpose: to make your agony a warning. The woman in the chair ahead of you, clothed in torn green fabric and trembling against the restraints, is already living the fate you fear. The knight beside her isn't angry, he's methodical, trained. His job isn't punishment, it's performance. What you're about to see isn't justice, it's a system. A machine built to silence women, reshape communities through terror, and hide the evidence in the ashes of history. Stay with me, what comes next explains how that machine worked and why its truth was buried. The fire always came last, but its shadow ruled every part of a woman's life. Long before a flame touched wood, the accusation alone was enough to pull an entire town into a frenzy. It didn't take much. A sick child, a failed crop, a harsh winter that left too many families hungry, any moment of crisis demanded a culprit, and fear always pointed its finger at a woman who lived just outside the lines men had drawn. A widow who kept to herself. A midwife who knew herbs better than the local priest. A young girl too clever for her own good. In times of uncertainty, logic shrank and superstition swelled, and the easiest way to restore order was to find a body to burn. Once the accusation stuck, the rest unfolded like a grim ritual. Crowds gathered in the square hours before the execution, as if waiting for a festival to begin. Children sat on their fathers' shoulders, vendors sold bread and warm drinks, and the local magistrates positioned themselves where the flames would illuminate their authority. This wasn't private justice carried out behind stone walls. It was a public spectacle, a performance staged to remind every woman watching what happened to those who stepped beyond their place. Even the setup was designed to sharpen fear. The condemned was tied to a stake, not gently, not quickly, but with deliberate slowness that forced her to face the wood piled at her feet. The knowledge of what was coming did half the work. The fire itself served as both punishment and message, built not for speed but for show. Executioners often lit the edges first, letting smoke rise long before the flames reached the body. The crowd watched every moment, their silence or cheers pushing the terror deeper. By the time the fire climbed, the woman's fate was no longer just her own. It became a warning carved into the minds of every girl standing in the back of the crowd, gripping her mother's hand and learning exactly how dangerous it was to be noticed. Nobody embodied this better than Joan of Arc. 19 years old, a military leader, a symbol of hope for her country. And still, none of it mattered once powerful men decided she had stepped too far from the role they allowed women to hold. Branded a heretic, she wasn't condemned because of visions or voices, but because her existence defied the order those men protected. When they tied her to the stake in 1431, they weren't just trying to end her life. They were trying to erase her courage, her leadership, and the possibility that another girl might dare to do the same. The terrifying truth is that burning at the stake wasn't an anomaly or the whim of a cruel ruler. It was a system, refined, accepted, and repeated across generations. A method for restoring control whenever society felt its grip slipping. A reassurance to nervous authorities that fear could still keep the world in place. Women weren't chosen because they were guilty. They were chosen because the spectacle of their suffering kept everyone else obedient, and as the fire rose, the townspeople didn't just witness the punishment. They absorbed the lesson. That was the real purpose, not destruction of a single woman, but the molding of an entire community through terror. Silencing a woman didn't always require flames or death. Most of the time, the people in power preferred something quieter, something that left the body alive but the spirit broken. The Scold's bridle was one of those tools, an iron cage forged not to kill but to erase a voice. A woman labeled unruly didn't have to commit a crime. She simply had to talk too much, argue too sharply, or question the wrong man in public. Once that label stuck, the bridle came out like a punishment kept ready for the next lesson. It wasn't slipped on gently. The metal frame clamped around her head, its cold weight pressing against her skull while the bit, a jagged piece of iron, was shoved into her mouth. If she tried to speak even instinctively, the spikes bit into her tongue. Pain wasn't the point, not entirely. Humiliation was. She wasn't left in a dark cell to suffer alone. She was walked through the village streets, her breath shallow, her eyes down, the device turning her into an object rather than a person. Men jeered. Women looked away. And children watched with the same wide-eyed curiosity they held for festivals, memorizing exactly what happened when a woman dared to use her voice too freely. The ducking stool offered a different kind of lesson, one that relied on spectacle and water instead of iron. A wooden chair bound to a long arm, positioned at the edge of a river or pond, waited like a trap that everyone pretended was justice. Women accused of gossip, witchcraft, or disorderly behavior were tied into it with ropes that cut into their skin. The crowd always arrived early for this one. People lined the banks, leaning forward eagerly as though waiting for entertainment, not agony. Parents lifted small children onto their hips, pointing toward the woman strapped to the chair as if she were part of a cautionary tale they needed to learn young. Then came the plunge. The arm swung outward, dropping the woman into the freezing water. She vanished beneath the surface, her screams replaced by the violent splash. When she was yanked back up, gasping, choking, trembling, the crowd leaned in, only to watch her dropped again. And again. Each time she rose, the humiliation deepened, the cold gnawed harder, and the terror burrowed deeper into her bones. It wasn't meant to kill her, though it often did. It was meant to show her, and everyone standing there, how far society would go to force obedience. Both devices created a world where silence wasn't just expected, it was enforced. Women learned that a raised voice, a strong opinion, or even the wrong tone could put them on display before their own neighbors. Mothers taught their daughters to speak softly. Sisters learned to nod instead of argue. Fear settled into the spaces between conversations, shaping every word women allowed themselves to say. The cruel genius of these punishments wasn't just the iron or the water, it was the community's role in carrying them out. The people watching weren't bystanders, they were participants. Their laughter, their judgment, their silence all helped turn torture into tradition. And the lesson reached far beyond the women tied to the chair or trapped in the bridle. It seeped into every household, every relationship, every girl growing up with the knowledge that her voice could be turned against her at any moment. This was power maintained not through death, but through shame, painful, public, unforgettable. Some punishments didn't aim to silence a woman or frighten a community. They aimed to erase the very parts of her body that society feared, resented, or wanted to control. These were the devices created with a chilling kind of intention, instruments that didn't just punish a woman's actions but targeted what made her a woman at all. When authorities spoke of moral crimes, what they really meant was anything that threatened the order men built. Independence, sexuality, defiance, or the simple refusal to obey. The breast ripper was one of the most harrowing examples. Forged with curved claws of iron, it was designed with unmistakably gendered purpose. Women accused of adultery, witchcraft, or pregnancy outside marriage were subjected to it, their bodies turned into a canvas for punishment. The device didn't need flames or elaborate machinery. Its horror was in its simplicity. A single motion, a single pull, and the message was clear. A woman's body belonged to the system, and the system could destroy it without hesitation. Survivors were rare, and even when a woman lived, her injuries ensured she would never move through the world unseen again. Her disfigurement became a sentence that followed her long after the punishment ended. But the cruelty did not end with what could be witnessed. Some tortures were designed to hide their violence inside the body, leaving wounds that no crowd would ever see but that would shape the rest of a woman's life. The Spanish donkey was one such device, a sharp wooden beam that forced a woman to straddle it while weights pulled her downward. It targeted the most sensitive parts of her body, causing damage that went far beyond pain. The injuries often robbed women of the ability to walk properly, work, or bear children. It was a slow, grinding destruction carried out in plain view of others who watched because they were told it was justice. Then there was the pair of anguish, a device that took intrusion to its darkest extreme. A metal object inserted into the body and expanded by a screw mechanism, it invaded the very spaces society claimed to guard so fiercely. Whether applied to the mouth for blasphemy or to other parts of the body for alleged sexual sins, its purpose was never truth or confession. It was domination, an intimate violation masquerading as law. No one needed to witness it for its impact to echo. The woman who endured it often emerged physically intact on the outside, but internally damaged in ways that medicine of the time could not understand or heal. These tortures didn't need crowds to be effective. Public mutilation delivered a message everyone could see, hidden destruction delivered one that everyone could imagine. Either way, the result was the same. Women were taught that their bodies were not their own, that their safety was conditional, and that stepping outside the boundaries set for them could lead to a fate designed with terrifying precision. Those who survived carried the scars, visible or not, into a life where trust was impossible, community was hostile, and survival meant shrinking into whatever shape society demanded. Their suffering lingered in the memories of those who witnessed it, becoming a quiet lesson passed down through generations without needing to be spoken. This was the point of such devices, not justice, not protection, control. A control so complete that even the thought of rebellion dissolved into fear before it could ever become action. These tortures didn't just target the body, they targeted autonomy itself, cutting it away piece by piece until obedience remained. Before we close, remember this: none of these devices were accidents of cruelty or relics of a violent age. They were weapons, engineered and perfected by the very systems that claimed to protect their communities. That's the real villain of this story. Not one man, not one king, but an entire power structure that learned how to control women by turning their bodies into warnings. And here's the part that should make every viewer stop and think. Those tactics didn't just vanish. They shifted, adapted, hid themselves inside new institutions and new rules. The question is how much of that old machinery still echoes in the world we live in today. I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from, and what part of this chapter hit you the hardest? Drop your thoughts below. I read every comment. And if you want to see more hidden chapters of history that authorities tried to bury, make sure you subscribe to the Unseen Past. There's so much more the past hasn't told you yet, and we're just getting started.